Dear chess friends, welcome to my YouTube channel. I decided to start recording a new series of videos which will be called Learning from Magnus Carlsen. Why I decided to do so? The reason is very simple. I believe Magnus Carlsen is the best player that ever played our beloved game. It's my personal opinion, and I know it's usually a very hot discussion. Some people believe that it's Garry Kasparov, some people believe it's Robert James Fischer, but in my view, as a very experienced chess player and as a coach, that Magnus is the best player that ever played chess game, the best all-around player. And you hear this opinion from someone who really idolized Garry Kasparov. He was my idol since my childhood, since I started to play chess. I was following Garry, I was watching his games, I knew almost all his games, was watching closely all his matches against Anatoly Karpov live and so on. Now, it's always a big question how to learn chess, what we need to cover, but it's just, in my opinion, essential to learn from the best player, Magnus Carlsen. First video I would like to dedicate to amazing game that has been played about a month ago. Magnus played with white against very talented Polish grandmaster, elite grandmaster already, Jan-Krzysztof Duda. The grandmaster Jan won a very recent World Cup and qualified for the candidates, and by the way, in the semifinals he beat Magnus. Now this game has been played during the Meltwater Tour. It's online event. It's a quick chess. If I'm not mistaken, it's 20 minutes games. So there is a match and they play a couple of games. Magnus eventually won this game, but this game is very special. This game Magnus beat Jan in 18 moves. It goes without saying that this game got a lot of publicity. Of course, you can find a lot of YouTube channel covering this game, a lot of publications and so on. But I'll try to give you a little bit more nuanced view about this game. Okay, let's move to this game. Magnus was white in this game and he started with d4. Knight f6, c4, e6, knight c3, d5, c takes d5. Now knight takes d5, a very popular line on the high level. Now, like, there is a move e d5, which would lead to Carlsbad structure, most probably Queen's Gambit declined. But here after knight d5, it's called semi-Tarrasch. Now, in this game, Magnus reacted with knight f3, c5, and e3. And I would like to mention that, of course, instead of this setup, there is a move e4, which after knight c3, bc3, c5, leads probably to the main line of semi-Tarrasch. So here the line goes like this: bishop b4, bishop d2, queen d2, and castle. But by the way, Magnus also played a few very nice games in this variation. I remember a beautiful win against Anish Giri, which impressed me a lot. But this time, definitely Duda was prepared for this. Now, this time Magnus decided to change a little bit and play a different type of pawn structure. So after c5, Magnus played e3. That basically means that after cd4, ed4, white accepts the position with isolated pawn d4. Now, well, if black would respond normally, let's say with the move bishop e7, I would assume that Magnus will play bishop d3, castle, knight c6, and will probably arrive to the most popular position with isolated pawn. I think the main move here is rook e1, and it's only the beginning of the massive theory with hundreds and hundreds of games here. Now, there is a new trend in this position that elite players quite often capture knight takes c3, changing the pawn structure bc3. Now, those pawns d4 and c3 are called hanging pawns. Now, in terms of strategy, it's more or less the same strategy like isolated pawn. Now, white is striving for activity, active play, not trading pieces. Meanwhile, black very interested to trade a couple of minor pieces and to obtain like some pressure against those pawns. Now, the idea here that black continues right away queen c7, and it's considered that it comes with the tempo. Usually white in this position either protect pawn bishop d2, or there were many games also with the move c4. In this case, black probably will respond with bishop b4, trading the pair of bishops, bishop d2, queen d2, and then castle, and so on. Now, also very important to mention that after bishop d2, here how black responds here. So this is the setup. Knight goes to d7, bishop d3, fianchetto of light square bishop, castle, bishop b7, then second dark square bishop comes to d6, maybe sometimes to e7, and it's very convenient setup, which very much resembles, there is a very similar position which arises in a Lapin variation of Sicilian, with the pawn still being e5 and d6, so they're not traded, and white try obviously to maybe keep this pawn on e5 alive as much as possible. Now Magnus in this position came up with a shocking move rook b1, which is not a novelty. I mean, I found in mega database, in the big database, I found 2 games played before by the player Salem. Now I would like to make the following point as well. When Magnus became a world champion, everyone recognized his versatility. He was a great all-around player, but everyone knew that maybe in the openings he is not the best player in the world. Now, let's say it's always considered that Fabiano is better prepared in the openings, but of course Magnus knew how to avoid mainstream lines, how to avoid maybe principal variations where he potentially can run into some like strong novelties. So he was maybe a little bit behind maybe top world players. It was not obvious, but I mean, I'm talking from my professional point of view as a theoretician who published 10 opening books and worked with a lot of grandmasters. However, in recent years, the situation has been changed. Now, I wouldn't say Magnus is absolutely the best opening player, but he is like very well at this level of top players. Now, I think one of the reasons that, of course, by playing already 5 World Championship matches, he built a very serious knowledge. It's always a very serious work on the openings, and usually when you have this preparation for the World Championship match, you build a massive database, a lot of new ideas, a lot of novelties, and of course you dive very much in depth into like theoretical lines. So he played in this game rook b1. Obviously it's a pawn sacrifice, which was now like at this move like rejected by Jan. Now after queen c3, I checked this position a little bit. White obviously will play bishop d2, which comes with the tempo. Most probably queen c7 would be the move, and now white quickly develops his pieces, mobilizing pieces towards the king side. Bishop d3, let's say bishop d6, castle, well, knight d7. So here I checked knight d7, and now, by the way, there was a game here which actually continued queen e2, which is, in my opinion, the right move. Castle was played in this game, and now the game that I mentioned, Salem against Barb, I'm not even sure whether it's a grandmaster from United Arab Emirates or, well, it's maybe some other player, maybe correspondence player. He played rook b5 in this position. Very interesting idea, but objectively speaking, not really working after knight f6. Rook is not getting to the h5, so I thought it's quite pointless. And a very natural improvement in this position, instead of playing rook b5, would be move queen e4, which provokes weaknesses on the king side. So it's probably the best idea to play here g6 and then we have dark squares. We can play bishop g5, or we can play bishop h6. Very, very promising position. White queens obviously can jump to h4, and it's very nice. Anytime rook fc1 is coming, targeting the queen, very, very promising position. Meanwhile, after knight f6, maybe the most natural move, protecting h7 and attacking white queen, white will play queen h4, and there is a very well-known idea, bishop g5. Meanwhile, h6 will run always into sacrifice bishop h6. So this position, I think, already very, very difficult for black. So this is what would happen if black will capture on c3. Now Jan played knight d7. I think it's a very clever decision. Now there was already opportunity to play c4, where white benefits basically from the fact that there is no bishop before check. This square is controlled by white rook. Nevertheless, after b6, and there is another game of the same player, so that's why I'm a little bit confused how it's happened like that, two games of the same players. c4, b6, I think black is not doing too bad here, even though that there was no exchange of dark square bishops. It's still okay. Bishop comes to b7, kind of like normal setup, normal development. So what was the official novelty? It's Magnus move bishop d3. So white actually insists on sacrificing pawn on c3, and it was very hard to refrain at this point. Now I believe it was a better choice not to capture this pawn, maybe playing b6 or bishop d6 in this position, and then definitely there was some preparation from Magnus' side, but we don't know exactly what would happen here. Now queen c3 looks very, very tempting, because this time we cannot play bishop d2. Our bishop on d3 hanging after bishop d2, so this move is not available. Obviously, it goes without saying we are not interested to trade queens, queen d2. Magnus played very important move, king f1, and one of the ideas that you can learn from this game, it's the concept of having king on f1 and developing white kingside rook through h4 move. So now when I ask my students about this position, actually many of them were concerned about the possibility of kingside castle and what happens with the king. So many suggested to go king e2 and maybe continue with rook e1 and king e1, which is so-called artificial castle. But obviously we have no time for this. We have no time for this. We sacrifice the pawn. We need much more aggressive play. So of course king f1. Now it's definitely very, very difficult position from practical point of view to handle for black, and it's not surprising that Jan played bishop e7 in this position. I think it's not the best square. Bishop d6 would be a better move in this position. Then let's say we continue with h4 like happened in the game to play b6. I think this is like the best continuation here for black. Maybe we'll see more games in the future. Now after bishop e7, white continued with h4, so we don't need bishop b2 move. There were some of my students suggested d5, interesting idea, like we have here the threat bishop b2, pawn on g7 is hanging, but after castle, let's say, just weakening the structure, it's not really a big accomplishment for us. It's much more important to mobilize our pieces on the king side as quick as possible. Now, that's why this move h4, black responded with castle and rook h3. Now, rook h3, so you can see potential x-ray, rook h3 with queen on c3. And by the way, guys, if here's the question, is there a very specific threat in this position for white? You can stop the video and think a little bit and understand that actually there is a threat here. Now, not surprising that Jan responded with knight f6 in this position, which appeared to be probably a decisive mistake. Now, the best move was queen c7, but still after queen e2, white position is much more promising. I analyzed this position a little bit in depth. It seems like white is having a good chances to launch a very, very dangerous initiative on the king side. Now, regarding my question, is there a very specific threat? Yes, it is. We already threatening bishop h7, and if black captures this bishop, there is knight g5, another check, followed by rook c3. So basically, rook h3 comes with tempo. It's very, very significant. Now, after knight f6, defending h7 pawn, Magnus responded with knight e5. So it's also very, very thematic idea. Like knight on d7 protects, controls e5 square. Once the knight leaves to f6, we can jump in knight e5. It goes without saying that bishop h7 an obvious threat right now. Basically, this position appears to be pretty much lost for black. I couldn't find any defense. It's hard to believe. But according to my analysis, it's basically the game is over. Of course, it's required very precise play from Magnus, but I mean, he was able to conduct this game and finish this game in a perfect manner. Now, bishop h7 is a threat. An obvious move is to move the queen away, queen a5, and now rook g3. So what white is doing, and that's a very, very important concept, is mobilizing pieces on the king side. Now rook g3, by the way, comes with immediate threat. So there is a threat, bishop h6. Therefore, black responded with king h8. Is it possible to allow bishop h6? Not really. Like, let's say if you play rook d8, we can jump bishop h6. Now, after g6, we'll continue h5, and there will be some decisive sacrifice on g6. So we'll obviously take on g6, and then bishop g6 somewhere on knight g6. There is no defense here. There is no defense. Now, after bishop f8, a very simple move, queen f3, threatening queen f6, decides the game, because knight cannot move. Also, f7 pawn will be hanging after if knight is moving. Now, that's why instead of rook d8, a very natural move, king h8 was played. Now, very precise, not so difficult, bishop g5. So another piece comes into the attack, and there is an immediate threat. So once again, you can stop video and think what white is actually threatening in this position. Besides mobilizing the pieces, there is an immediate threat here, and the answer is white is threatening to take bishop f6, followed by queen h5. And in this case, not only queen h7 mate will be threatening, but also, guys, you might notice that there is once again x-ray with the queen, so there will be idea knight g6. You can play this position, play out this position on the board and see how it's working. Maybe it's too many arrows, but I think it's pretty clear. Now, Jan responded with the h6. Now in this position, queen d8 doesn't really help, bishop f6. Now, why this move is actually working, we basically eliminate one of the defenders. Bishop f6, queen h5 comes, and the problem is that not only mate is threatening queen h7, but also f7 pawn is hanging. So after h6, we take on f7 with decisive advantage. Now g6 will run into sacrifice bishop g6, fg6, knight g6, and with decisive attack as well. Now, here, guys, I wanted to mention in this position that after bishop g5 was played, h6, here we can see one of the concepts of the attack, the initiative, how quickly white mobilized the pieces. And I like to mention the simple math count. If we just count how many pieces in the attack, so we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, and definitely the queen. The queen joins, it's either h5 or f3 squares, could be g4 potentially. Now, what about defenders? We have rook f8, bishop e7, knight f6. So basically, with the primitive math, we have 5 versus 3. And usually, as a rule, from my personal experience, that +2 advantage is enough for decisive attack. Now we have +1 advantage, it's kind of like 50-50. So that's an example where it's working perfect. Now, after h6, how to continue here? Once again, you can stop the video and think about this position. A very simple, decisive blow is bishop takes h6. Once again, not surprising, because black has not so many defenders on the king side. gh6, and now very interesting moment when I ask this position, my students usually respond with the immediate threat queen c1, threatening queen takes h6. Now this move also wins, but requires more moves and precise calculation. For instance, after knight g8, as far as I know, rook g8 is winning, but probably the most convincing in this position to bring the queen f4, and then after f5 there is rook g8, king g8, queen g3 check, king h8. So there is this variation which is eventually winning, but it takes time, it takes precise calculation. Meanwhile, instead of playing queen c1, the game ended in one move. Magnus played queen f3, threatening obvious queen f4, targeting h6, and it appears that there is, even though black has a move, there is no defense. Now, one exemplary line that I would like to give you, let's say black plays queen d8. So we play queen f4 and knight g8. Now, of course, simple knight f7 is winning, rook f7, queen f7, and black is hopeless against queen g7, queen h7 mates. There is also fancy queen f7, which queen is actually untouchable. I would definitely play queen f7. Meanwhile, rook f7, knight f7 leads to mate in one. Back to queen f3. So here black is hopeless. There is no defense. There is no way even to fight for a few moves. That's why Polish Grandmaster Duda resigned in this position. Amazing, remarkable 18 moves victory against elite Grandmaster by Magnus Carlsen. It's not only a very interesting opening idea, but I'm pretty sure Magnus was also aware of the concept, how to develop his initiative on the king side. So what we can learn from this game, a couple of points. Now, very interesting opening idea number one. The concept king f1, seemingly that king is without castle, followed by h4, rook h3. So when rook is activated from h3 square, there is no reason for castle, obviously. It also helps to attack. And the most important is mobilization of the pieces towards black king, to mobilize as many pieces as possible, and then there will be, obviously, some ideas will pop up when you have such a massive mobilization as five pieces attacking black king. Some tactical opportunities will come up. So in this game, it's happened that bishop h6 followed by queen f3 was played, so black king obviously defenseless here. Guys, I hope you enjoyed. That was my first experience with the series, learning from Magnus Carlsen, the best player who ever played chess game. I hope you enjoyed. Please like this video, subscribe, and by the way, there was some technical issue with notification button. So I according to some of the guys who watch my videos, it didn't work. Now I think it's working. So please highlight notification button so that you'll see my new videos, and I'll see you next time on my channel. Thank you very much for watching.